Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. Last week, Republican Jefferson Griffin lost his effort to overturn the results of last year's state Supreme Court election. But North Carolina voters will feel the effects of this case for years to come. That's because Griffin's lawsuit succeeded in changing the rules for future elections. Every overseas voter, and perhaps some inside the state, will face new rules at the ballot box. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran has been covering the case, and he joins us now by phone. Will, good to talk to you again.
You too, Jack.
Will, we do this every time we talk about this case, but for those who haven't been following it, just give us a really quick summary of why it's been 6 months without a certified election in the state Supreme Court race.
Yeah, so the 2024 elections come and go. We have a couple of recounts, and it looks like Democratic Justice Allison Riggs has won by about 734 votes out of about 5.5 million people. So just a razor thin margin. But her Republican opponent, Jefferson Griffin, doesn't concede defeat. He attempts to throw out the ballots of about 60,000 people. And the ballots he challenges are largely from counties or from certain demographics that lean left. And this case bounces back and forth in state court, in federal court, trial court, appeals court. I mean, we have covered this at every possible level of the court system, basically. And Griffin wins originally at the State Court of Appeals and the State Supreme Court. But then most recently, a federal judge, notably a Trump appointee, stepped in and put a stop to it and ordered Riggs to be certified the winner. He said that basically a ruling in Griffin's favor would be violating the U.S. constitutional rights of all of these thousands of voters who are being challenged for treating them unfairly.
So now the race is settled. Riggs' victory is scheduled to be certified today, but you report that the impact of this case will be felt for years to come. Why is that?
Well, because while that federal judge who said that what Griffin wanted to do would have violated the constitutional rights of all of those voters, that was just if you applied it retroactively. Looking forward, he said he had no problem with what the state courts ordered. So he just thought that it shouldn't be the case that we essentially punish voters for not following rules that didn't actually exist when the election happened. I think probably to a lot of people that seems like common sense. That had been what Riggs and the Board of Elections had argued all along, but that was a very tough part of this case. But this judge, while he did throw out this attempt to retroactively change these ballots, he allowed the state Supreme Court ruling to go into place. So that means that for overseas voters, they're going to have new rules when they go to vote. And that's starting in just a few months with the 2025 municipal elections. And obviously, then, of course, we've got the 2026 midterms just around the corner as well. And there could also be some changes for voters who aren't overseas, who are living here in North Carolina.
Can a court just change laws like that?
Yes, they absolutely can. There's even a word for it: case law. It's different from law that a legislature writes, but it has just as much effect. And now these new laws that were ordered into place by the state Supreme Court are law. That is why we have a court, and it's why so much money and effort has been spent on fighting for the seat on the Supreme Court. There's only 7 seats. Only one of them was up for re-election last year, and millions of dollars have gone into not just the election, but also this post-election litigation, because the court does wield so much power to be able to do things like this.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about who will be affected by these new rules. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about new election rules in the wake of the Jefferson Griffin case. Will, these rule changes focus on some very specific groups of voters, as you mentioned before the break. Just quickly break down who is going to be affected by these changes going forward.
Yes, so this is where it can get kind of complicated, but Griffin's challenges basically targeted 3 different types of voters. And the smallest group is people who are called never residents. They're people who were born outside of the states in a foreign country, have never lived in any state, including North Carolina, but they're allowed to vote in North Carolina because their parents are North Carolina voters. And this is aimed at mostly the children of soldiers and foreign missionaries. And the legislature in 2011, when Republicans took over, voted actually unanimously to allow these people to vote. But Griffin challenged that and said that, basically since from 2011 until now, that shouldn't have been allowed. That's been unconstitutional the whole time, he said. It needs to be struck down. And the courts agreed. They ruled that it is unconstitutional to allow those people to vote in state elections. But again, this was just a state Supreme Court ruling, so it doesn't affect federal elections. And then the same thing with all overseas voters. Those folks have never been required to show voter ID. Unlike the rest of us, we go and show ID at the polls. When you're voting from overseas, there's no poll worker to show your ID to. It's much harder, and state law has never required them to show ID. Griffin argued that they should have been required to, and basically the courts have now said, well, we can't go back and punish people for not showing ID when they couldn't have done so even if they wanted to back in 2024. But moving forward, yes, those overseas voters do need to show ID. But again, just like the never residents, this ruling only applies to state elections and not to federal elections.
So overseas voters, that could be a lot of military voters, right? Could that hurt Republicans or could that help them?
Yeah, that is a big question. There's lots of, people who are in the military and their families as well, who go and get stationed overseas. But I think what also gets left out a lot in the conversations about overseas voters is you have plenty of people who, maybe they're just on vacation when the election happens, or you also have a lot of college students, in a state like North Carolina with so many big colleges, people who are studying abroad for the fall semester, or, in the primaries in the spring semester, who are voting as well. So, it might be a bit of a wash, when you consider that probably college students are a little bit more liberal leaning and, military members are a little bit more conservative leaning. It's a little bit hard to nail those numbers down, but it's absolutely possible that going forward, this actually could potentially affect Republicans more than Democrats.
Now, as you mentioned, many of Griffin's challenges were against people whose names were misspelled or maybe were missing a hyphen in the voter rolls, stuff that wasn't really their fault. What happens with them?
Yeah, so this is the group of people who there's probably the least certainty about right now. Those overseas voters, the new rules for them, we know that those are going to go into place. But the people who are basically have missing information in the state database, which was around 250,000 voters, including about 60,000 of whom actually voted in 2024, they could see themselves purged and have to re-register to vote. They could see themselves required still to show their ID. That never actually ended up happening because of this court case, because that was actually thrown out by the state Supreme Court, and so it was never taken up by the federal courts in this. But that is still very much an open question and will be one that has to be resolved by the new Republican majority that we have here on the State Board of Elections.
This seems like a mess to have to deal with from an administrative standpoint. How will the Elections Board handle this?
Yeah, there is no question that this is going to be a big mess and a big undertaking for this new board. I talked to one voting rights advocate who described this as a soup of chaos that we are heading into, which seems like a fitting metaphor. It's pretty much unheard of that we're now going to have multiple styles of ballots that we have to send out to these voters, because some people are only going to be eligible to vote in federal elections but not state elections. Like I mentioned, those never resident voters, so for instance, they'll be allowed to vote for U.S. Senate but not state Senate. They'll be allowed to vote for president but not governor. And so there's going to be, we're going to have to create new ballots and create new lists to keep track of all of those folks to make sure that they're not voting in anything that they shouldn't be voting in. And then for the people who are showing ID, the same kind of thing. If they, for whatever reason, don't have an ID, don't show their ID, and don't have a reasonable exception, their vote will still be counted in the race for president, for Congress, but it just wouldn't be counted for the state legislature, for governor. So getting all of that in place, and then on top of it, coming up with a system to even allow overseas voters to show ID at all is going to be very busy, because guess what? the first municipal elections of 2025 start in September. That's only a few months away. So it's really kind of a mad dash inside the state elections board right now and all the county elections boards to get these new rules in place, get it all set up in time for September to be able to have this go off without a hitch.
Now, the elections board, as you mentioned, was just flipped to Republican control. Will that play a role in these rule changes and how they're administered, or could there be more changes?
Yes, that will absolutely play a big role. The board isn't able to write laws itself, but it's in charge of interpreting the laws and then also administering elections and basically figuring out the best way to do things. So they're going to be the ones who are, not only choosing what kind of voting machines we use, but, how overseas voters are going to go about providing an ID and, creating these lists and monitoring these lists of these overseas voters who now might have two different sets of rules depending on what kind of election they're voting in. And they're also going to have the very big question of what to do about these nearly 250,000 voters who have missing information in the system. Back in 2024, there was a complaint filed about these voters with the missing information. Basically, when you register to vote, you're supposed to provide either your social security number or your driver's license. And a lot of the time, people do that, and then whatever government employee is putting that in a state database somewhere just does it wrong. Maybe they accidentally put a hyphen where a hyphen shouldn't go, or vice versa. Maybe they forget an apostrophe in your last name if you have that. Just any sort of minor issue. They type a 2 as a 3. Anything can make you look like the state doesn't have your information, even though in a lot of cases it actually does. And the State Board of Elections, back before the 2024 election, actually voted unanimously, one of the very few bipartisan things that the board had done, to dismiss that complaint, throw it out, say, look, there's nothing to this. We know who these people are. We have voter ID rules anyway, so even if they're missing on this database, we're still going to be looking at their ID when they show up to vote. And so they threw that out. Then the GOP sued, both the state GOP and the National Republican Party sued and tried to have all of these voters purged. And it was actually the exact same judge who issued the ruling in the Griffin case. In that case, also ruled and said, no, GOP, you cannot purge all of these voters so close to an election, because it was August when they were trying to do that. Basically, voting was just about to start when they were trying to purge those voters. So they were unsuccessful in doing that. But now, since the Republican Party also now controls the Board of Elections, they don't necessarily need to sue to be able to purge all of those people. They could just have their new political appointees do it for them. But of course, that could then be met with lawsuits by Democrats. So we could see this end up in court yet again. But that is still, probably weeks, if not months down the road.
Going to be interesting to watch it all play out. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran for his extensive coverage of election laws in North Carolina. Go to the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.